So, as I said just a couple of days ago, I had to go to a conference in Manchester, and I went by train because, to be honest, to get to sort of Manchester, um, if I drove, well, I'd have to find somewhere to park the car. Um, and like I say, if you've ever known, driven, or anywhere near central Manchester, sometimes trying to park your car can be just as a difficult challenge, at least for, like a full weekend. And maybe you're paying probably even more than you were for a train ticket. Although, to be honest, getting to Manchester by train was about £26 for a return, which, to be honest, wasn't too bad. Like £26 for a return, yeah, not too bad, and an open return as well. So that was pretty good. It wasn't too bad a price, but like I say, sometimes it can be a lot bigger. But yeah, transport in the north is still a hot issue up here, and I have to wonder whether this actually transport and trains can potentially become a general election issue. Now, of course, you never know what is going to be the big issue at a general election until the general election happens. Like I say, take the 2017 general election. Everyone thought it was going to be about Brexit, but it turned out not to be about Brexit at all. It turned out to be Theresa May and pensioners' heating allowances. Like I say, sometimes general elections can take a bizarre turn as to what that general election, particularly the core issue, can sometimes be. But transport, over the past certainly year, definitely from the train strikes and everything else that's been going on, has been an ever mounting and increasing issue. So today we're going to have a look at this piece, and this piece was written by a pressure group called We Own It, and it is a group that pushes for nationalisation. So if you are interested in sort of more information about nationalisation or how we potentially sort of go about doing nationalisation for certain things and sort of the benefits for nationalisation, then definitely go check out We Own It. It's a very, very good group. But we're going to have a look at this piece that one of their people wrote for the New Statesman, which is about sort of rail travel, and of course the great new plan that West Streeting had come up with, called the Great British Railways. Let's find out about how great this plan really was. But before we do that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. And of course, down below, there is the YouTube thank you button, and there is the YouTube subscription called the Pony Club, where you can join that as well and support the channel that way. So, as always, let's go diving on into this. So this comes from the New Statesman. The title of "Was the Great British Railways Ever the Answer to the UK's Transport Woes?" The UK has had 3 prime ministers in the space of 4 months. And at the time, the public needed clarity on government policy in the face of an escalating cost of living crisis and climate crisis. We've been left in the dark on a number of policy fronts. While most of this focus has been on the energy crisis, the huge NHS waiting lists, and the economy, public transport is also in urgent need of attention. Our railway has almost come to a halt. Yes, on strike days when workers take action against an enforced deadline in pay and conditions, but also on regular days because of the chaotic network of private railway operators who simply cannot run the trains on time. This isn't just the result of the pandemic slowing our railway system down. The chaos we see today is the result of a complete lack of vision and planning for rail. It is not fit for the future, and it is unable to provide a reliable green mode of transport that people can afford. The Williams Rail Review, which began in September of 2018 and concluded in May of 2021, led to the announcement of the Great British Railways, or GBR. And in the, quote, Plan for Rail white paper, this was touted as a sweeping set of reforms, the most ambitious plan for our railways seen in decades. The premise of these reforms was that the problems in the system were crystallized for many by the 2018 timetable debacle, and it was down to the fragmentation. Too many chefs in the kitchen, and worse, those chefs were not motivated by their profit-driven interest to pull their own direction. Even as the set of reforms aiming to try and merely plug the problems identified by the Williams Review, GBR fell short of what was required. The plans left the private train operators, or the TOCs, and the rolling stock companies, who actually own the trains, also called Roscoes, still very much in charge. And implementing these policies would not have reduced the number of chefs in the kitchen. It would have simply given the government a bit more control over their behaviour. The reforms did have some positives. They proposed a greater control of the rail system for a new public body, the GBR, including over critical areas of timetabling and ticketing. The incremental basis they represent in a minuscule step is towards the railway system that we need, that the public expects. One that works for people and not for profit. No one knows what the fate of these GBR reforms or what kind of future we can even expect from the railways in general. Following the collapse of Boris Johnson's government and Grant Shapps' removal from the Department of Transport, this now and also former Transport Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan announced that the legislation need to put the GBR on the statute books will not be tabled this side of a general election. That was quite a shock, and especially to the 6 local authorities who were in the middle of competing to host the new GBR's headquarters in their city or town. This prompts a question: does anyone know what's going on? And bear in mind, as he said at the start, because we've had so many different prime ministers in such a short time, there are lots of policy fronts like this going on. So even though railways are in a shocking state in this country, they really, really are, there are many areas. And like I say, the NHS, you've got the cost of living crisis, energy crisis, obviously the main 3 big ones that, are on people's minds at the moment, at the forefront when you ask people. But there's so many other areas that are going on. Water and sort of the sewage discharge that has been continuing to flow. I wouldn't be surprised, given the fact that we are expecting another big deluge in the next coming, I think, a week or so, whether we get to see or hear more from that front as well. So there are a ton of different things going on that have just been essentially just left to languish on the vine, unfortunately. And it just goes to show you just how poorly governed as a country we really are. But anyway, back to it. So, a DTF spokesperson said, "We remain committed to, quote, tackling the challenges set out in the plan for rail and implementing a modernization needed to transform the industry so it is sustainable for the future. It is worth reiterating that although Great British Railways would have had represented some progress, and many perhaps have improved the overall performance of our railways to a degree, it did not present a real solution to the crisis that led to its conception. Our railways are failing us because for decades we have had a system that is run for profit rather than for passengers. And in the years leading up to the pandemic, private railway companies, the TCOs and the Roscoes, made £1 billion a year on profits on average. This is money that could have gone into cutting rail fares for passengers by over 18% or building 100 miles of rail track. For far too long, the system has allowed the private rail operators to orient the services they provide around for what is best for their short-term profit margins. This simply does not work for rail users or workers. With passenger numbers at their highest in our railways history just before the pandemic hit, private rail operators were able to maintain the illusion that they were doing a good job. But lower passenger satisfaction numbers show that this was never felt by the public. And the conditions tightened during the pandemic. It was unsurprising that the system buckled. In a properly managed railway, the pandemic should have led to the removal of private operators from the system altogether, with it being taken fully into public ownership. This is what was somewhat surprising that this did not happen, given the government and its Welsh and Scottish counterparts have shown themselves willing to take on rail franchises, such as East Coast Rail, Northern Rail, South West, Wales and Border and Scots Rail. When their private operators, uh, when their private operators run again, but instead we saw the government decide to only take very limited control of the companies and behaviour while safeguarding their profits. Our railways should work for us and not for the profits of a select few. Switzerland has the best railway service in Europe, and it is no surprise why. It is run entirely in public ownership. If we did the same with our railways, we could cut fares, modernise and improve the service. Yes, including by paying the staff better and improving their conditions, and using our railway system and the surrounding infrastructure as a lever to tackle the climate crisis. And also, I should also add to that, because he hasn't put it there, but I would also argue that massively improving our railway system in this way would be a dramatic improvement to the economy. Dramatic improvement to the economy. Massively. And I think we've discussed this in other videos where we've talked about sort of rail and sort of the improvements that that can have on a very, very dramatic scale. Rail can really help improve local economies massively. Anyway, back to it. We'll finish off. So the short-termism at the heart of government is just making our railways difficult to improve. It is actively obstructing the changes that are needed, and it's time for common sense and market ideology to be put to one side, which means it's time for public ownerships of the railways. And I agree. And why do I sort of really agree with this sort of big nationalisation? Well, quite simply, whenever you poll people about sort of nationalisation, people ask, well, what are we nationalising, first of all? And depending what you ask of what you want to nationalise, you can get very, very different numbers. People might be in favour of nationalising one thing, may not necessarily be in favour of nationalising another. But consistently throughout sort of polling history, when you look at when polls have been done asking this question, what was always the highest? Always the rail. Rail would come in at some of these things like, 64, 69%. They were really, really high. A lot of people are really in favor of really nationalizing the railway, and this is a massive opportunity. Because one of the things I've said and why the left should be supporting Keir Starmer's move to create a government-owned energy company is if you can do this, we can prove nationalization works. Because it's not just saying we're going to nationalize it, it's saying what we've got to do to plan. So like what was mentioned there, we can cut rail fares, we can improve worker conditions, and, we can pay them more. So those are at least, three good positives that you can have. And again, I'd say as well, improving local economies. What we talk about Bradford, a massive city in the north that basically has next to no direct rail links to any close towns or cities or even a direct route to London. And it is damaging its economy. And it's not just places like Bradford, it's places all over the place. And honestly, rail, depending where you live in the country, you can either have really good experiences of rail or you can have really bad experiences. And I think it is time that if the left really wants to go on a nationalization turn, then it shouldn't go, instead of nationalizing everything, it should laser focus and go, let's nationalize one thing with a good plan of, we're not just going to nationalize it. When we nationalize it, this is what we're going to do to it. This is how we're going to make the system run better and how it is going to affect people's lives by having a better run railway system. So if we can get that and then prove that how fantastic nationalization works and is for like railways, then you can go, okay, now we're going to nationalize power, which is why I've said Keir Starmer's idea of having a nationalized government run green energy power sort of provider is a good thing, because if you can prove that that is a success and that it works and that this is something the government can do, then that way you can also show, well, maybe if a power company fails, well, bring it into public ownership. And it's all about showing people nationalization works, because there has been campaigns, propaganda for years against the British public, telling them how bad like nationalization was. Oh my God, everything was falling to pieces. It was absolutely awful and terrible. But when you actually go look back at the documents and the things, and they weren't necessarily falling to pieces, they were working. They just needed the government to sort of start putting more money into it, start investing in it more, start taking it forward. But unfortunately, successive Conservative governments did not do that, and that was their aim, to sort of show, oh yeah, see, nationalisation, what a failure it was. Guess we've got to privatise everything, which is what they've always done. It's what they're even technically trying to do now to the NHS. But like I say, as always, let me know down below what you think. Like I say, I think rails, or at least the railways, would be a fantastic place to really start, and for the left to start making good cases for, if we nationalize the rail and we make it a success, then why wouldn't nationalization work for a myriad of other things that we want to nationalize? So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a motivation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.